Hi everyone, I'm Emily Dahl and I'm joined by my colleague Mikayla. We work at ABARES in Canberra and you may know some of our publications such as the Australian Crop Report and the Agricultural Commodities Report. I am the analyst for Western Australia and I also cover corn and barley markets.
So as Emily alluded to, I'm Mikayla. I'm the canola and soybean analyst here at ABARES and would like to start by thanking you guys for the opportunity to talk today. We would have loved to be joining you over from West Australia, but today joining you from Canberra. And so Emily and I are going to cover off on 4 topics today. We're going to start off with historical canola prices and compare them to today's prices, followed by global supply and demand for canola, Australian supply and demand for canola, and finish off with our outlook for Australian canola in 2021-22. So Em, kick us off with prices.
Yeah, well, starting off with prices, canola prices have increased significantly over the past 12 months and have reached, well, multi-year highs this year. And the Australian export price that we look at is the Canola price. It peaked in June this year, reaching just over $600 per tonne. And in today's dollar terms, that's the highest the Australian canola price has been in roughly a decade yet.
Okay, so that's the Australian price. How are we comparing globally?
Yeah, so comparing the Australian price to the Canadian canola price, we can see that the Canadian price has really skyrocketed this year, and it's created quite a price gap. So now the Canadian price is trading at a premium over the Australian canola price, and that hasn't always been the case. So from July 2018 through to December 2020, the Australian canola price traded at a premium over the Canadian price.
So why was the Australian price trading at a premium?
Yeah, well, we've done some analysis on this price gap, and it seems that Australian canola attracted a premium over Canadian canola for various reasons. One being its secondary use. So the secondary value of Australian canola used as non-GM meal in the European dairy industry. So interesting to note here is that the canola produced in Canada is genetically modified, whereas in Australia we produce both genetically modified and non-GM canola. And it was the non-GM canola from Australia that was favoured in the European market. And I guess there are some other factors to mention here, such as drought-affected production in Australia, also a trade dispute between China and Canada, and large crops in Canada.
Okay, and so you mentioned that the Canadian price has since surpassed the Australian price. So what's changed here?
Well, as of December, the Australian canola price is no longer trading at a premium over the Canadian price. And what this indicates is that tighter supplies in Canada, as well as strong demand, has really led to that sharp increase in the Canadian canola price. And I guess worth mentioning here then is that it's the movements in supply, demand and stocks that lead to changes in prices in world canola markets. As for the forecast for 2021-22, canola prices are expected to remain high, and this is because of world demand outstripping supply.
Okay, so let's take a look at world supply to understand these price movements just a little bit more. So for some context, Canada is the largest producer of canola globally. And as you can see, when it comes to export markets, Canada is even dictates the market even more, occupying about 68% of world exports of canola. This is followed by Australia as the second largest exporter on 35%. So because of Canada's large market share, it means that production conditions in Canada largely impact Canadian prices, and that flows on to Australian and global prices. So what we have seen is that Canada is more of a price maker, and then Australia is more of a price taker.
So does that mean then that the Australian canola price tends to track Canadian prices?
Yeah, exactly. So consecutive drought years in Canada and really high prices of canola globally meant that many countries were depleting their stocks of canola over the last couple of years. So what we're seeing with world stocks is largely depleted, as well as Canada is largely depleted. And so what we see in the global price is it peaks in areas where stocks of canola are depleted. So with Canadian production for 2021-22, we're actually anticipating an increase in production of an increase in area planted. However, because of depleted stocks, most of this or much of this will be going into replenishing stocks as opposed to being available on the global market. So in the Canadian Crops and Field Report, which was released in July, we're seeing that they're actually forecasting a further increase in the canola price in Canada for 2021-22. So this is great news for Australian canola because, like we said earlier, the Australian price usually tracks the Canadian price. So that's enough about the global supply story for canola. What's happening with global demand?
Well, when we look at global demand, we look at three key drivers. So that is food use, industrial use, and feed use. So how about we start off with food use then? And food demand for canola oil is expected to remain stable in 2021-22. Despite a downturn in hospitality sectors worldwide, the COVID-19 related restrictions haven't had a huge impact on consumption levels of vegetable oils. And this indicates then that vegetable oils are considered a staple, so demand is relatively unresponsive to changes in consumer incomes. Now, I guess that leads us then to the second type of demand, and we look at industrial use. So this here is biodiesel demand, and biodiesel demand is expected to recover with the COVID-19 restrictions beginning to ease, as well as with more people getting vaccinated. Now, some key watch points here for biodiesel then are the renewable energy targets, both in the European Union and the United States.
Okay, and so another factor to consider when talking about biodiesel demand is oil prices. So with rising oil prices, it's anticipated that vegetable oil prices will remain strong.
And then I guess that brings us to the third demand driver, which is feed demand. And when analysing feed demand and feed markets worldwide, it's also important to consider other oilseeds, especially soybeans. And the Chinese industry's efforts to contain African swine fever and rebuild the pig herd has led to increased growth in feed demand. And that strong import demand coming from China has boosted global soybean trade, lifting soybean prices.
Okay, and so what does soybean prices have to do with canola prices?
Yeah, well, canola is a substitute for soybeans. So as the soybean price increases, it's also pulling up the price of canola.
Okay, so we've established in global markets we're seeing limited supply coming out of Canada and strong demand for canola and oilseeds. So now let's focus a bit more on the Australian conditions. So what's happening with Australian production of canola?
Okay, well, just first a bit of background. The Australian canola production increased rapidly in the 1990s from very low levels, and now production averages around 3.5 million tonnes each year. That's based on a 10-year average to 2020-21. And following consecutive drought years, we did see a really strong rebound in canola production in 2020-21, and that increase was both in terms of volume and value. The Australian canola production value is estimated to be $2.4 billion in 2020-21.
Okay, and so we're anticipating another exceptional year for 2021-22?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, the area planted to canola is forecast to increase by 25% to almost 3 million hectares in 2021-22. And I guess one of the things to mention here is that favourable world prices and excellent planting conditions, especially in Western Australia and New South Wales, boosted the area planted to canola this season. So we're expecting Australian canola production to increase to about 4.2 million tonnes in 2021-22, and that's roughly 20% higher than the 10-year average.
Okay, so these forecasts are from our June Australian crop report, and we'll be looking to revise these numbers up or revise them in the September crop report. This will be available on the 7th of September on our website. And so now let's jump into the Australian demand story. So we've established that we're going to have a large supply of Australian canola, so we've got to make sure we've got those markets available to consume all of this canola. So for Australia, on trend, usually we crush about 1 million tonnes of canola domestically, and so anything in excess of that 1 million tonnes is available for the export markets. This means that in high production years, we have more available for the exports. So for Australia, the largest importer of Australian canola is the European Union. They consume roughly 3/4 of Australian exports, and this is really important for you guys in Western Australia because Western Australia is responsible for about 60% of Australian canola exports, and that's exactly why the Canola price is so susceptible to global prices, because you guys are a major player in the global scale. So in the European Union, most of this canola is consumed for biodiesel production.
And what are some of the stats on Australian canola exports?
Okay, so following the drought years of 2018 and 2019, we saw a strong rebound in exports. They more than doubled to about 3 million tonnes in 2020-21, and we're forecasting for a further increase coming into 2021-22. So the coming year, we're expecting exports to increase further. So this means that Australia is very well positioned to cater for global demand for canola in the 2021-22 season, especially if major competitors such as Canada are going to have limited supply. So another thing that we want to note is that if Canadian prices for canola are anticipated to increase even further, this is going to be making Australia very enticing and internationally competitive. Therefore, we could be looking at gaining back a fair bit of market share in the European Union. So plenty of global demand to satisfy that increase in Australian production.
Yeah, wow. So higher production then, coupled with strong demand, bodes really well for Australian canola in 2021-22.
Yeah, so we've established the global supply, global demand, Australian supply, Australian demand, and all of these factors are leading to strong, if not strong and stable canola prices for Australia and the globe in 2021-22.
So updates on what we've spoken about today will be available on the ABARES webpage in September. We have the Australian crop report coming out on the 7th of September and the agricultural commodities report coming out on the 14th of September. Thank you very much for listening.
And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.